Alright, today I have a manhandling guide for you. Techniques and tips for rougher sex and BDSM play. I'm Brandon the Dom, let's dive in. So manhandling is when you use physical force or strength to move your partner around. If you've watched my previous videos on how to be a Dom, you know that one of the core functions of Dom is to give direction to the submissive. And most people are going to equate that to giving commands. And while that's very effective, physically directing your submissive using your strength can be just as effective and can elicit other feelings that help her to sink into that submissive mindset. One of the biggest complaints that I hear from submissive women is that their partner is not rough enough with them during sex. Now, I understand why men would be a little hesitant to be rough and commanding and directive with their movements during sex. It usually boils down to a few reasons. First off, they might be afraid of hurting her. And this is reasonable and honorable to look out for her safety. In fact, that's one of the things that you should be doing as a Dom. However, women are not fragile little beings made of glass. They can take a lot of force, way more than you think, and they actually love it. She may be your little princess, but she wants to be thrown around. The second reason that a man might be hesitant is a lack of confidence. This is more an overall problem than a localized one to just manhandling, because the lack of confidence is going to lead you to making very timid movements. What I recommend here is working on developing your overall dominance. And I have plenty of videos here on my channel for that, as well as I just wrote a book called Enter the Dom, the No BS book on dominance. I recommend picking that up, going through it, and developing your dominance, and letting that confidence permeate all of your actions, including ones that are required for manhandling. The third reason is a lack of competence. You may just not have the actual skills and ability to physically move her around or know how much force you need to actually be exerting. This one's a pretty easy fix. You just learn the skills, which luckily you're watching this video, but there's plenty of other resources that you can find. Practice them and then just adjust with each new experience. And then the last reason is a lack of strength. Pretty straightforward. If you don't have the strength to lift her up and toss her around, you're not going to be able to do it, and you won't do it. So get stronger. Manhandling really is a foundational skill for rough sex and is going to dramatically change your bedroom interactions. So let's get started in understanding and learning how you can manhandle your submissive. First, let's understand why a submissive would enjoy being manhandled. Being manhandled is one of the universal desires that I've found across many submissives. Yes, there are always exceptions, and you should definitely talk with your partner if this is something that they want. When you do, you're likely to hear that being manhandled and moved around and feeling your strength and force exerted on them is going to help them feel more submissive. First off, it makes them feel small. Because of the strength that's required to actually pick them up and move them around, it's going to make them feel smaller than you. And a lot of times, this is actually the case where they are smaller than you. It also makes them feel helpless. They're basically completely at your will. They just move and do as you direct them. Even if they wanted to resist, they know they could be easily overpowered by you. There's also a lot of exhilaration in these movements. These movements are often quick, strong, forceful, and unpredictable, much like a roller coaster is. As a result, they can get this feeling of exhilaration and excitement mixed with a little bit of nervousness. Manhandling also allows them to get in that process of turning their brain off. Because you're moving them wherever you need them to keep things going, they don't have to think about it. They don't have to worry about anything. You're directing the show, she's just along for the ride. And then one last possible reason is that they physically and viscerally get to feel your dominance. When you physically exert your will, they get to feel the passion and lust of a man that goes after what he wants. Now let's talk about how to actually manhandle. I'm going to go through some techniques and some tips, some of my favorites, but manhandling is more about a mindset than it is any one specific technique. And it's more important to internalize this mindset than it is to actually learn these techniques, because once you are embodying this mindset, then you can move your submissive in any which direction is needed based on that and not have to remember technique. So the core mindset for manhandling is you're in charge. Use your physical force or strength to exert your will and move her wherever you need without hesitation. Pretend just for a moment that your sweet little submissive is a sex doll. Would you hesitate or be light or kind to the sex doll when you needed it in a different possession? No. You would just throw that thing around without hesitation. You'd have a desire and you'd immediately act on that desire without a second thought. Now, obviously, you need to have a little more care with an actual live person because you don't want to cause injury. However, the shorter that you can make that desire stimulus to movement response and removing any of that second guessing of yourself, the better you'll be at manhandling. And with practice, the more trust you'll gain in yourself that you'll actually exert the right amount of force in order to move her wherever you need. And eventually, these movements will become second nature to you. Now let's cover some of my favorite techniques. The first set of techniques is to literally pick her up. This is obviously the most easiest way to move her around because she has no longer contact with the ground. One of my favorite ways to do this is to pick her up and throw her on the bed. And there's a few different variations of this. One is to do a fireman carry, where they're over your shoulder, and then flop them onto the bed. Another way is to do the romantic way. So you see this in a lot of romantic comedies where the woman is in your arms, one laying across this arm, legs across this arm, and you're carrying them. And then you can literally just toss them into the bed. Personally, the one I like is to actually start in a position where you're kissing face to face and then reach behind her, grab under her ass cheeks, lift her up, and then basically like turn around and lift up on her ass and throw her to the bed. I think this one's a lot more fun because she can't see where she's going to land. So there's like that moment mid-flight of the toss that she's like, oh fuck, where am I going? And a lot of times you see her face light up and then sort of giggle and laugh when she actually hits the bed. Another thing you can do with picking her up is to pick her up and place her against the wall. You can use the same technique where you're kissing face to face, reach under, grab her ass cheeks, and then push her up against the wall. And she'll usually wrap her legs around your waist. Now, depending on your chest and arm strength and how small she is, you can also pick her up off of your cock whenever you're having intercourse. So one position is you sitting on the edge of the bed, where your feet are flat on the floor, and she may be riding you in your lap. What you can do is literally stand up. So you're basically kind of like squatting, but not pulling your cock out of her, and turning around, throwing her onto the bed off of your cock. Then crawling back up on the bed and getting back to business. The other way is if you're letting her ride cowgirl and she's on top of you, you can literally just pick her up by the waist and toss her to the side. The next major technique is to push her. Now this is meant as a playful push more than an aggressive, like I'm gonna beat the crap out of you push, because you don't actually need that much force. There's a couple main times that you'll probably use a push. One is when you're gonna push her onto the bed. So you'll just kind of back her up so that the back of her calves hit the bed. Then you just give her a light push on the shoulders and let her fall backwards. The other type of push is pushing her into the wall. And this is more like a push and hold where you lightly grasp her hips and push her back up against the wall. And if you want to intensify this movement, you can actually put one hand behind her head, the other hand on her hip, and give more force as you push her up against the wall and kind of get like a slamming motion. And the reason that you have your hand behind her head is so that her head doesn't slam against the wall and reverberate, accidentally get a concussion. The next thing to do is directing her attention or her movement. And the best way to think about this is the same way as leading in dancing, where you're giving small movements to her body in order to get her to move where you want. So some examples of this is to do a hand under the chin or even just one finger and just subtly pull with that finger. And this is great for pulling her closer or moving the face in order to kiss, have eye contact, to do dirty talk, whatever. The next is put your hand on the back of her neck. And this can be used in order to direct her while she's standing, or it can be used while you're having intercourse to push like her head into the bed. It's sort of kind of like a reverse choke where you're doing the choking motion from behind. The next is to grab her hair, getting close to the scalp and basically pulling her hair and using that as a way to control her head. And this can be particularly useful if you're grabbing her hair and pulling her head back a little bit in order to reveal her neck, or to make her look up at you if she's kneeling or below you. The other way you can do this is from the hips. So anytime that you guys are standing or you're moving her from one area of the room to another, the best way to do it is from the hips, because that is her center of gravity. And basically all that you're doing here is giving a light push in whatever direction. So if you want her to move backwards, you're pushing on the front of the hips. If you want to move towards you, you're pushing on the back of the hips, on the side of the hips. And it's just like dancing, where you're giving a light little push and then she gets the signal to move that way. Another way you can do this is standing behind her. So having her stand in front of you, facing the same direction. And then you can weave your arm in front of one arm, behind her back, and then in front of the other arm. And you kind of get this lock, this restraint from the back. And, she can't move her arms. And then you can easily move her by pushing into her back or pulling this way. And she gets that more close, restrained feeling. The next set of techniques is doing body compression. In these techniques, you're basically using your body weight to compress on her. And this makes her feel small, helpless, but also comforted and safe. So the first version of this is to hug her basically from behind. And here you're not going in for a bear hug, but you're, tightly locking in and snuggling in to her neck, kissing her neck, and just lightly squeezing. If you do this with your arms over hers, you can also flex your biceps to get a little bit of compression in that area as well. The next way is basically missionary position. And here you are going to vary the amount of pressure that you're allowing to compress on her by how much body weight you're holding up yourself. So I always recommend like 50 to 60% of your body weight, like resting on her. And you can use your forearms to adjust basically how much compression you're giving her. The other version of this is basically doing it from behind. So both of you are laying prone, but now you're on her back essentially. In this version, you can let a little more weight compress down on her, somewhere about 75%, because here she can use her arms to support underneath her. And with this position, I like to wrap my arms around hers and wrap my hands up in order to hold her hands as I'm compressing her. This is basically going to feel like one giant weighted blanket, which is very comforting and grounding for her. The next set of manhandling techniques are used for better positioning. So during intercourse, you can direct her body wherever you need it in order to get a better angle for both of you. In addition to using manhandling to change positions. There are actually quite a bit of adjustments that you can do during sex. So these are just going to be a few. The first is the grab and scoop. So here you can do this either if they are laying on their back or laying on their front. So if you're going to be doing missionary and or going to be doing some doggy position, this works both ways. But basically what you're doing is you're grabbing around their hips and actually into the crevice of where their thigh and hip meet. And you're basically grabbing, lifting up a bit, and then scooting towards you. A lot of times I do this movement in order to move them further down the bed. Sometimes when you're doing a lot of thrusting, you get moved up the bed and you just need to readjust downward. The second one that's really important to learn because it's going to make it much pleasurable for both of you is the hip hinge. So almost every position can be made better by learning how to hinge her hips so that when you were thrusting, you're hitting her G-spot or rubbing up against her clitoris. So here, the idea is putting your hands in her hips again in that crevice between her thighs and where her hips meet. And now you're tilting her pelvis wherever you need it so that you're hitting those spots more easily. A lot of times this is going to be curving her back so that her ass kind of pops outwards and you're able to hit those positions. And this kind of leads into the next technique, which is getting her to curve her back. So this is particularly important for doggy style because if she starts to arch her back this way, it doesn't work as well. And so what you need to do is learn to have her basically put a bow in her back this way to do that. And you can help direct her to do that by doing this hip hinge, taking one hand, putting it in that crevice and tilting her hips like this. So it's going to basically your thumb is pressing into her back a little bit. And this is hitting her thigh. that's going to signal to her that she needs to pop her ass like this, and then taking your other hand and grabbing her hair, the back of her head, and basically giving a light pull, which is going to tell her, oh, I need to dip like this and pull my head backwards. The next technique that can also be done in doggy position is to push her into the bed. And here specifically, you're wanting to basically push her head and the top part of her chest into the bed. And you can do that easily by putting your hand in between the back of her shoulder blades and then just pushing down. And then you can use your hips to basically push forward and downward so that you both end up in prone position. And then the last one in this set of techniques is rolling her over. So basically here you're trying to keep your cock inside of her as you transition through different positions. And the best way to do this is basically grab both hips, kind of slam her down onto your pelvis, and then roll with her in whatever direction you need to go. So if she's on top, you guys are doing cowgirl, you could do this, grab her hips, kind of bring her closer and then roll over. Similarly, if you want to move to doing cowgirl from missionary position, you can basically grab her closely by the hips and then just use your hips to roll over and pull her on top. And this can also be done in doggy as well. You can go from doggy down into prone, grab her hips and roll over and kind of do that side spooning position or even rolling her on top of you. Now let's talk about restraining. Sometimes she wants to exert a little playful resistance and feel you overpower her. This is going to require some strength on your end to actually keep her restrained and not wiggling so much. So the first instance that this is going to happen is usually when you're pinning her arms down. She'll be laying on her back. You'll have her by the forearms or the wrists, and she'll be trying to resist, struggle, bringing her arms up, and you will slam them back down. It's actually better that you grip the forearms than the actual wrists, because a lot of times you're going to be putting weights down on this, and the wrists are very small and bony, don't have much support when they're being pinned down like that. So if you can grab further down the arm on the forearms, it's going to feel a lot more comfortable for her. The other option is to hold hands with her and to push that way. And that can be a little more flexible for her as she's getting pinned, but you can also push her hand too far backwards and that can be painful. So I always recommend the forearms over the other two. The next thing you can do is pinning her down by the hips. And if you remember earlier, I talked about her hips being the center of gravity. So this becomes very effective, especially if she's squirming a lot, to be able to pin her down by the hips. And again, if she is laying on her back, this can basically position her to the bed so that she can't get up. But this also becomes fairly effective if you're giving cunnilingus, eating her out, and she's really enjoying it, kind of squirming around a lot. A lot of times I'll reach up around her thighs and then pull down and grip her by the hips so that she can't buck as much. The next thing you can do is pinning her face down into the bed, at least pinning her head, even if she's turning it to the side, down into the mattress. A lot of times when you're fucking her from behind. And this can either be done by grabbing a bunch of hair and pushing the head into the bed, or grabbing by the back of the neck, basically doing a reverse choke. When you're doing this, be mindful that you're not putting all your weight on top of her head. It's going to put a lot of strain on the neck. And instead, you're just giving enough pressure to lock her head into place. And then the last one I'll mention is restraining her face. So basically what you'll do is make a U shape with your hand and you'll put it up under her chin and lock basically the sides of her face, grabbing the cheeks. And this is particularly helpful if you want to keep her face looking at you and keeping eye contact. And then the last set of techniques that I'll go over before we get into the tips is gripping her holes. So this is a little more degrading and a little more rough. Basically what you're going to do is with light or moderate pressure, because it's not going to take a lot, is use your fingers to grip one of her holes and pull towards you. Again, these are more degrading or objectifying. So make sure that this is actually something that she wants. So the first is gripping her by the mouth. And you can do this if you're fucking her from behind. You can basically reach around and grab the sides of her mouth and then pull backwards towards you. Again, lightly. The other place that you can do is grip the bottom of her jaw like that. And this can be done from behind, reaching up and under and gripping that way. Or it can be done in either missionary or her on cowgirl, reaching up and basically grabbing her jaw. And this should be done lightly, and you're not actually going to be pulling that much, especially while you're thrusting, because you could dislocate her jaw if you yanked on it. The next is gripping her pussy. So something that I like to do a lot of times when I'm stimulating her G-spot, I'll basically stop and grip really hard and pull towards me. A lot of times mixing in dirty talk, asking her who this fucking pussy belongs to, and basically holding and gripping that as much as I can. And another way is gripping her asshole. So this one's particularly well if she's on all fours and basically giving you head, and you can reach over and with a well-lubed finger, lightly press in and then pull like it was an anal hook. And this can give you a little more grip, especially if you are going to get into face fucking or deep throating. Finally, let's talk about some tips as you put these into practice. So the first is to remember your goal. Why are you even including manhandling in the first place? Is it that you want to be rough and aggressive, or do you want to be more essentially demanding? Remember the techniques that we went over. There's a difference between roughly and aggressively moving her with both hands or using just one finger to direct her attention. Both of those have different vibes to them. The second tip is to be mindful. There's lots of little things that you need to keep in mind as you're moving your submissive around. The first is to keep in mind your strength. Know how much that you can actually lift in all ranges of motion. Obviously, you can lift more by squatting and picking her up than you can by holding her at arm's length. And this is where spending adequate time in the gym, mainly doing compound lifts, is really going to help. Depending on your strength and the body composition of your partner, there are some techniques that you're not going to be able to do. Another thing to keep in mind is her flexibility, because there are some movements that are going to require some flexibility or strength on her part. The more flexible she is, the more able you are to bend her to your will. And this is why I particularly enjoy yoga practitioners, dancers, people that are very in tune with moving their body, because they can just be moved around and thrown around like rag dolls and move just swiftly as possible. You also want to keep in mind obstacles, especially if you're throwing her around or tossing her around, moving her around quickly. You're going to want to look out for walls, headboards, or other obstacles that they might hit their head or body on. You're also going to want to be mindful of force. You need to learn exactly how much force is actually required to do some of these movements. You also want to consider how force actually sets a tone or mood or intention to those movements. Doing something that's very aggressive very quickly is going to be shocking, whereas doing something that's light and subtle can also show a form of dominance, but in a different way. It's kind of like saying, look, I have so much control over you that I can move you with almost no effort. And then the last thing to keep in mind is the potential to leave marks. Depending on how easily your submissive marks and how much pressure you apply, there are times that you can leave marks, especially to the forearms if you're gripping and putting a lot of pressure there. On the hips, those areas sometimes can leave grip marks. The next tip is to weave in simple commands and dirty talk with these movements. Remember at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that commands are an excellent way to give direction. So combining commands with your manhandling movement will make it very clear what needs to be done. But since the bulk of your direction is going to be actually given within the physical movement, your commands need to be very simple, such as forward, bend over, very quick, easy commands. Then if you want to intensify those movements, you can start to mix in some dominant dirty talk. So things like, come here, you little slut, as you're moving them towards you, or now I have you right where I want you, as you're restraining them, can help add a little spice to these movements. Now I know dirty talk is usually something that people in the beginning really struggle with and being confident with. So I'm going to link an article down below that I've gone through a bunch of different ways that you can build phrases for dirty talk, and have a free downloadable resource that goes with that as well. So find that down in the description. Now let's talk about some tips for the submissive who is being manhandled, because being a good submissive also takes skills, and there's some things that you can do to make it a more enjoyable experience. So the first thing that really helps with manhandling is for you to just surrender to the movement. Don't fight it unless you intentionally want to resist. You basically need to trust your dom that he knows where you need to be in order to maximize pleasure for both of you. If you try and take control while he's manhandling you, the movements are going to feel very clunky, kind of like your bodies are working against each other rather than being in flow. The next tip kind of follows from this one, but it's to become a rag doll, or just kind of imagine your body as limp. It's the same advice of like when you're getting in a car accident, it's far better to relax your body than to get tensed up. That's exactly what you want to be doing here. Let your body soften and just flow with your dom's movements. With that being said, you also want to support and flow in the direction that your dom is moving. So just like in dancing, when the lead starts to move your body in a particular way, you then support that movement by actually moving in that way. So those are the different tips and techniques for manhandling. And I think it's one of the most overlooked and underrated skills that you can develop. A lot of times when people get into dominance and submission or BDSM, they start going for all the different toys and things that you can be doing. But I always recommend learning how to use just your body, because it's always on you and it's going to intensify anything else that you're doing. So start small, gain confidence in your strength and your abilities, and each time increasing the amount that you're actually manhandling her. Remember the key mindset. You're in charge and you're going to use your physical force or strength in order to exert your will and move her where you need without hesitation. And if you need more help developing that confidence in being a dom, I offer one-on-one coaching. Let's jump on a call together, see what challenges you have in actually stepping up to be that dom, and I will help you work through those. I'll leave a link down below where you can schedule some time with me. In the meantime, go ahead and check out this video on developing your sexual dominance, on the different things that you can do in the bedroom, and the different levels that you can work through in order to develop your sexual dominance. Thank you so much for your time and attention.